If you're a kind of person that really likes to engage with your mind, maybe your hands would be placed on your head instead of on your heart. Just reminding yourself that you really want to be fully present. Or maybe you want to do something that is typically seen as the universal sign for prayer, but for some strange reason, Christians have moved away from this, and that is putting your hands together like this. This is the symbol for prayer. It reminds you to be balanced. So maybe your fingers need to be clasped so you don't be fidgety. Or maybe you just put them together and feel that balance. Maybe your hand is on your heart. Maybe your hands are on your head. Just maybe your hands would be open if you feel like this morning is about receiving something new. Something my wife taught me about 15, 20 years ago is that if you stay still, if you're sitting upright and you stay still and breathe, it doesn't take long before you realize that your heartbeat is actually rocking your body ever so gently back and forth. When's the last time you were still? Stillness reminds you of who you are. And it's one of the most long-standing practices of followers of God in the world. Just be aware as you breathe in, maybe you just remind yourself that you really need to receive this morning. And as you breathe out, just remind yourself that you were made also to give. So last week we talked about the idea of, or this ancient practice of people being set free from debt. This is explained in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 14. We're going through the book of Deuteronomy as a church family. Amen. And we're in Deuteronomy 15. And on the tail end of this idea of being set free from debt, which is a really amazing concept, isn't it? The idea of owing somebody something, and then on the seventh year, it just being forgiven and it's just gone. We talked about that at depth last Sunday. So within the context of that framework, within the context of that practice, is Deuteronomy 15, where what do you do then? Like, let's say you have a debt, and then it's just set free. What do you do then? And I think it's important for us to realize that what that would have really meant to be in debt was not just to technically owe money. It's an ancient Near Eastern practice that the Hebrew people observed, which was if you were in debt, you worked for the person to pay it back. And so it's called debt slavery. It's different than forced slavery, maybe in how we normally might think of the word slavery. Debt slavery was you owe a debt and you don't have any money to pay back that debt. That's the reason you went into debt, and you pay it back with your work, with your time. And so you would pay it back for a maximum of 6 years, because on the seventh year you would be set free from that debt no matter how much more you owed. And in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 12 through 18, which was our reading this week, amen. And I know you all read it and you got it. So you're set free, and then the person who lent the money releases this person who's a debt slave, and then makes sure they're on their feet somehow and they can go live their lives. And then there's this really interesting, rather strange add-on. And the add-on is for the servants or the debt slaves that don't want to leave. Let me read this from verses 16 and 17. But if your servant says to you, I don't want to leave you, because he loves you, and loves your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through his earlobe. And the people of God said, Amen. All right. What if you don't want to leave? What if you owe something and then that is paid off? The debt's completely paid, but you still want to be there. So it's this really interesting practice with getting your ears pierced. And so there's a difference, right? So if you're serving, no ears pierced, it might mean that you're a debt slave. If you're serving but you have your ears pierced, you're essentially saying to the community, I want to be here. It's rather strange. And speaking of strange, there's a lot of strange stuff in the Bible about earlobes. What do earlobes have to do with anything? Well, there's so much here. You can read Leviticus, in particular Leviticus 8, Leviticus 14, but a priest would bring a leper, this unclean person. The skin is unclean, and there's a practice where it's so strange, but sometimes it involved oil, sometimes it involved blood. You see this several times in Leviticus, and then either oil or blood was placed on the earlobe, like you do. The earlobe is somehow connected with holiness for some reason. And when you think about applying oil or blood on an earlobe or piercing an earlobe for some sort of symbolic reason, it might not make sense but if you hear it this way, like when Jesus said, let those who have ears to hear, let them hear. It's like you have ears and they're for listening or hearing, right? But there's a difference between actually hearing it versus really, really hearing it. So hearing or listening or the ear became associated with obedience. Like you can be listening or you can really, really be listening. And so there's something about the piercing of an ear, oil or blood applied to an earlobe. I think we just need to realize, guys, we barely understand what it was like to be a human being 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. It's hard for us to really grasp, because, the blood on the ear means feel strange. So we have to go back, try our best to travel back in time. What might it have been like to be there? Well, there's something significant about the ears, and there's a connection between ears and holiness, between ears and listening, obviously, and obeying. Let those who have ears to hear, let them actually hear. Listen to this psalm that seems to be and has been interpreted to be a prophetic foreshadow of the Messiah. It's from Psalm 40, verses 6 through 8. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears have been pierced. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you do not require. Then I said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. So this is a psalm, which is in the Old Testament. It's a poem, it's a song, but it's considered to be a foreshadow or a prophecy about the Messiah, Jesus. All these sacrifices and burnt offerings and all these things you didn't desire, but my ears have been pierced for you. Right? In the context of freedom, deciding to still serve. That's a foreshadow, a prophecy about the nature and character of the Messiah. And we know this from Philippians chapter 2, and note takers, Philippians 2:7, referring to Jesus, it says that Jesus took on the nature of a servant. You heard this before? Right? Even though being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the nature of a servant. The word for servant, and some New Testament mostly was in Greek. Some of the New Testament passages this Greek word, sometimes it's translated as servant, sometimes it's translated as slave, but the word is doulao. Would you say doulao with me? Doulao. And so he took on the nature of a servant, a doulao. And a doulao is someone who cares for the needs of others. It doesn't mean slave as in forced slave. It means someone who decides they want to care for and look out for a holistic care for someone else and their needs. Ready for this? It's where the word doula comes from. You know what a doula is? Doula is a Greek word that means female slave. And if you've ever known a doula or worked with a doula or even know what a doula is someone who assists with or provides guidance and support during pregnancy and labor, when a woman is in labor. Well, you don't consider a doula to be a slave in the sense of having to be there, right? Actually, you don't even really consider a doula to be in any way a position lower. This person, out of the goodness of their heart, is providing guidance and wisdom and support, helping someone go through the birthing process. And it's really special and wonderful. And so Paul, one of the early followers of Jesus, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, he says this: "Though I am free, and I belong to no one." See that language? Though I am free and I belong to no one. Like, I don't have to serve anybody, right? I've been set free. The debt's been forgiven. I no longer have to do this. Though I am free and I belong to no one, I have made myself a doulao to everyone. And so you have Messiah Jesus even though being in the very nature God, decided to be a doulao to the world. And then Paul, being set free by Christ, says, I am free. I'm not bound to anybody. Or to paraphrase him, I don't have to do anything, right? And I hear people talk, Christians sometimes like, I'm free. You actually are free. There's no more debt. It's been completely forgiven. And here's an example before you. The ultimate free one, Messiah Jesus, decided to become a doulao to the world. Paul, one of the earliest followers of Jesus, one of the early leaders in the movement and faith tradition in Christ, said, though I am free and belong to no one, I make myself a doulao to everyone. And so I want to share with you a little chart that an amazing teacher taught me about 15, 16 years ago. Amazing teacher, someone that I looked up to very much, who's shaped me significantly and taught me some of the most deep things I've ever learned. It's a really simple chart. And it starts with being a slave, and then being set free. Okay? We normally think of freedom as the end goal. But if you think of the Israelites being set free from slavery in Egypt, their freedom was in the wandering of the wilderness. It wasn't the actual goal. We normally think freedom is the goal. Freedom isn't the goal, but what's the goal? Well, you could say the promised land if you're taking it literally, but the goal, this teacher suggested is to become a servant. But it's with kind of an asterisk, right? It's not going back to slavery, right? You're set free from slavery, but you don't go back to being a slave. You choose to continue to move forward into being a doulao, into being a bondservant is what some translations of doulao, a bondservant. You make that decision. See, because freedom, as weird as it might sound, freedom isn't our goal. Freedom is where you have choices. And here's another way, here in the chart, another way of saying the same thing. First, you start out with no choice, right? If you're a slave, you have no choice, no choices. You just have to do what you have to do. And then when you're set free, you have choice. And it seems like that would be the goal, right? To have choices. But I don't know about your experiences in life, but let me share you with my experiences in life. When I have a lot of choices is when there's the most tension. When I go into the grocery store and there are 75 versions of olives, I don't know what to do. Right? When I've traveled in the world and I go to a grocery store in another country that's more simple, I go, yes, one jar of olives, thank you. There's something about choices that we think we want, but it actually creates a lot of tension for us. And so the goal is actually not choice, even though we would totally think that that's what we want. This movement is not back to that version of no choice, but the movement is to no choice in a further direction because we've made our choice. I think a very clear example of how this plays out in many people's lives is in the context of marriage. This idea of entering into a covenant, right? You have choice, and that seems great, but then you make your choice. And once you make your choice, you've made your choice. And so, but it's not the same thing as having no choice, you see? So you don't go back to the idea of no choice. You go to movement of no choice with an asterisk. Because when we've made our choice, we're no longer looking for other options, right? And so you'd think that serving someone would be bad, like a slave, but what if you want to? But what if you want to stay? Well, you get your ear, because you love people so much, you get your ears pierced, and you're like, I want to be here. It's not the same thing as back when I didn't have a choice. I've made my choice. And I want to be here. By the way, this teacher of mine that's been teaching me this chart for 15, 16 years is my wife, Kimberly English. So going a little further in the New Testament, Galatians chapter 5, there's a letter written to early followers of Jesus. Galatians 5:1 says this, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." See the imagery? I'm going to read it again. Picture this. "It is for freedom that you've been set free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Yoke is not the egg yolk thing, it's the animal farming thing. You've been set free. That yoke is not going to hold you down. Don't go back to slavery. So in that, it just seems like, right, it's for freedom that you've been set free. But if you just keep going a little bit further in Galatians 5, it continues, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in sinful natures." Right? So he's equating that back to almost like slavery. "But rather, serve one another humbly in love." So you've moved into this freedom category. You've moved into this choice category. And yes, you can make decisions because that's what it means to be free. You can decide to do whatever you want to do. The debt's already been paid. You've already been forgiven. And if you want to, you can just squander that whole thing and make it seem like a joke. You can do that. But that's a really bad idea. You know? Like it's rude. If somebody forgives you and they love you unconditionally and they lay themselves down for you and just say, "I love you no matter what," and you go, "I appreciate it, I'm going to go wreck everything," that's really rude. And that's not what forgiveness is for. And that's not what forgiveness is meant to do. Forgiveness is meant to bring reconciliation so the relationship is restored so that you can be one with each other, so that you can actually move towards something, right? In my human relationships that I've had that have been broken, that there's been forgiveness and apology and forgiveness and reconciliation. We don't live forever only talking about that. Remember that one time where you hurt me? That's not what the relationship's about. We get reconciled so that we can move towards something. We don't always talk about what happened back then. And actually, if you said that you've forgiven someone and you keep talking about what they did, stop it. Because we're not meant to live a life where there's a yoke of slavery. We're supposed to be free and move towards something. And that is what Paul is suggesting, is to serve one another humbly in love, Galatians 5:13. So we choose to serve, right? We're free, and yet in our freedom, we decide to bind ourselves to others. It looks like the same thing, but it's completely different. It might look like, well, I just have to do whatever they say. It's not that. You just decide you're going to do what is best for them. You're going to decide to support them and provide guidance for them. And so what I've found in this culture, in the high country here, and a lot of the friends that I have, a lot of people that have been here over the years and for whatever reason have gravitated to feeling connected with this church family. And this might not describe all of you, of course, but I think it describes many of you that I've spoken with over the years. A lot of us have realized that we needed to leave religion. Right? And we know that we don't have to earn God's love. And so when you come to that realization that we don't have to give God an offering for God to like us. We don't have to bring a burnt offering to the altar in order to appease God. We already know that we have been approved of in and through Christ. And God loves us, and God demonstrated that love for us in full already. And yet, we want to be bound to God and others. Not because we have to, but because we want to. You feel the difference, right? Because some of you might be here because you still think, like the culture has pounded you down and conditioned you to think that you have to be here for God to like you. You have to be here because it earns points somehow. Well, but then there's people that realize, well, I don't have to do that. I don't have to live like that. And so then you're set free. And then you have choice. But there's where the tension lies. Because if you don't have to be here, what are you going to do? If you don't have to be here to have union with God, what are you going to do? What does that mean about your relationship with God? What does that mean about your relationship with other people? If you don't have to be here, if you don't have to slit the throat of the goat, what are you going to do? And so we bear with one another, right? We listen. We learn from each other instead of leaving. We choose to see the image of God in everyone we see. Why? Because we decide to. We listen to different perspectives and different interpretations because in our freedom, we decide to be a doula. So maybe you left religion because it was slavery and you needed to go. And you realize it was just this oppressive thing holding you back. And you now know that you are free from oppression, and you're free from guilt, and you're free from shame, and you're free from rules upon rules. But you love so much, so you want to bind yourself to God and people. I think that's many of you. So in the spirit of this law, instead of us having a station, I actually, no joke, half joke, was going to call Piercing Company, have them show up and get a station in the corner as our altar call. It would have been an insurance nightmare. It would have communicated the wrong thing, but it would have been memorable. But the spirit of this law, there's something about at one point in your life being in debt and then being set free, but in your freedom still deciding to serve anyway. And so, may we realize that there is no more yoke holding us down. There's no more yoke forcing us to go somewhere. There's no more yoke that's heavy, that's a burden that makes us grind it out. No. That yoke's been taken off. But we don't wander around aimlessly. We decide to take on the yoke of Christ. And Christ says this, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We don't follow Christ because we have to, because we're a slave. We follow Christ wherever Christ leads because we just want to. And because when it's what you want to do, it's light and it's easy. You're not a slave. You're a servant. In the tradition of the great servant, Christ, who's not forcing you. There's an ease in this kind of service, isn't there? There's an ease in the kind of service where you love people not because you have to, but because you want to. There's an ease in volunteering to serve children, not because you have to, but because you want to serve. There's an ease in giving. There's an ease in sharing. There's an ease in listening. And so what if we took on the posture? What if our church family continued to move towards, I see a lot in us, but what if we had the posture that we don't have to, we're free. We're not a slave to anyone. We're not bound to anyone. But we choose because we want to. We want to provide guidance and support for people that are going through the birthing process. Do you know what I mean? Instead of just thinking, they don't even know what they're talking about, I'm right, they're wrong. What if you just choose to serve? And some people might look upon you and just think you're a slave. Whatever. But you know that you're just here and you're listening and you're learning and you're helping somebody process the thing that they're going through, this birthing process that they're going through. And so, my sisters and my brothers, actually, is it okay can I ask you to stand? Would you be willing to stand to kind of receive a blessing? And if you're here, you're like, I don't know what you're about to say. I don't know if I'm ready to receive this. I get it. My sisters and my brothers, listen. May you choose to have the same mindset as Christ and become a doula. May you be like the great doula, our Messiah Jesus, and provide guidance and support to one another as we are born again and again and again and again together. So God, thank you for teaching us this way, for showing us this way, for being that in us and through us, for your Spirit being this in us and through us. Would you equip us and enable us to be that for one another? We know that we're free. We know that we don't have to give you anything to make you happy. There's no amount of money, there's no amount of time, there's no amount of community service, there's no amount of studying the Bible, there's no amount of signing up for some program that will ever do it. We are not even meant to pay you back. That's not how debt forgiveness works. You just got rid of the debt. And so now, as free people, we decide we really want to serve. Not because we have to, because we really, really want to. And may it be so. Amen.